Welcome to the channel. In today's video, we are going to be rebuilding the front suspension on my wife's 1972 BMW R75/5. So the reason we're doing this is the front suspension is super spongy. When you hit the brakes, the front end just like dives down super bad, and you can see it kind of like super bouncy, and it's just not an ideal setup, especially for her first bike. What we're trying to do is just make this bike as safe and just as turnkey reliable for her as possible. So follow along and let's get to it. And then getting our front wheel out of here is just a 22 millimeter on the axle here, right side of the fork. And then there's a pinch bolt here for the axle, and that's just a 6 millimeter Allen. And then every fastener we're removing, we're replacing with stainless steel. We can disconnect our front brake cable from the brake drum. Then we can get our front brake support arm out of here. That's just a 13 millimeter. We can use a socket on the lower one, but we'll have to use a wrench on the upper. And then we can remove this little support arm. And then pull our axle out of here and drop our wheel out. And then with our axle out, our wheel and brake just slide right out. And then we can get our fender out of here with 13 millimeter nuts. There's 4 of them. And then this lower part is a 10 millimeter, and you'll have to use both a socket with a ratchet and a wrench. Be able to just slide that off and then go right down like that. Perfect. We can undo the hose clamps that hold our front fork gaiters on. Our next step is going to be undoing the triple tree and kind of getting the fork out of here. We'll start to see big headway here shortly. So up top here on the fork, there's a little cap here that's threaded on, and there's 2 little holes in there. So what you do is just use a tool like this. You can shove it in those holes and then loosen this up, and it's just like a normal bolt, just like that. And that's actually where you put your fork oil in, and there's a nut behind here that kind of does all the securing for the fork. So we'll grab this out of here, this nut here, and loosen up our lower triple tree bolt, and then our whole fork leg will slide out. And then for loosening up this big nut here, usually what I do is reach into your toolbox, grab the biggest crescent wrench you got, 17 millimeter wrench on this lower triple tree bolt. And when this loosens up, sometimes you have to like put something in here to kind of help spread the triple tree in this little groove there. But other times, perfect, like that, it just falls right out easily, like that. And you can see the previous owner had a spacer in here, and that's designed to help preload the spring. So it's just adding a little bit more preload to the front fork, and we'll probably leave this spacer in even with our upgraded springs, just to get a little bit more of a stiffer front end. I'm going to take the right fork leg out, and then I will measure how much fork oil was in here, and then we can compare that to how much is supposed to be in here. So that'll be kind of fun. I'm interested why it had such a squishy front end, especially with those spacers in there. Thanks a lot for the support too, by the way. My channel's been getting really popular lately, and it really does mean a lot, because without you guys, I wouldn't be anything. So if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. And if you've been here for a while, thank you very much. So we know how much is supposed to be in here, but it'll be, ooh, there's like, looks like some Teflon tape hanging out there. I wonder if these forks have been rebuilt before. They do not have, they have the factory springs. It looks super rusty in here. We'll set this off to the side. And it looks like there's fork oil in there. Let's measure how much comes out. Then we'll be able to get a good look at what it looks like. Oh, it actually doesn't look that bad. So we're right at 440 cc's of fork oil. So it had roughly, we'll just say it had 220 cc's of oil in each leg, which actually isn't all that bad. So now we can start taking our fork legs apart. So what I'm going to do first is pop these little rubber caps off the bottom. And then with a 13 millimeter socket, you might want it on a little bit of an impact to get this nut off on the bottom. Just like that. And then that reveals like a little stud, and that's actually like our cartridge. So you can just kind of push that in. That goes up and down with the fork. And then with that bottom nut loosened, we can just come straight out with the fork leg, just all the way out. And then that really reveals our fork tube. And within this fork tube is all of the kind of what controls our dampening and everything. So my suspect is something in here is messed up. It's also nice seeing a shoddy fork seal job. Looks like it got pinched and it actually wasn't leaking, or there was no signs of it leaking. But it was definitely installed kind of shoddy there. And then there's these big nuts on the bottom. It's a 30 millimeter. And we'll do that on both tubes here. If you have one of these at home, they're worth their weight in gold. It's just a fork seal, not necessarily a fork seal puller, but a seal puller in general. They can be bought anywhere for cheap. And then in the bottom of these fork caps with that 30 mil, there's little bushings here, and we will replace these. And then there's a circlip in the fork leg right there. And then there's this little collar here, and that you can just shove that same circlip pliers in there and just unthread it. It comes out relatively easily. And then there's another bushing right here. And then the cartridge can just get pulled straight out of the fork leg. On that little cartridge at the end here that we're going to pull out, there's shims, and we don't want to get the shims stuck on the threads because it'll kind of damage them. We're going to be replacing the shims, but when you get it out, just kind of weasel it out of there if it gets caught on the threads. So it should just kind of pull straight out just like that. And then going back in is the same. You just got to be careful not to get caught on the threads and push it too hard. So it comes smoothly out like that. And then this is literally just a blank fork tube. Doing that again, we're going to pull the circlip out, set that off to the side, use that same pliers, loosen up this, set that off to the side, grab our cartridge, pull it out, and there's that bushing. You can actually just pull it right on past that, just like that. And there you go. Pretty simple. I just did it in 30 seconds. So taking our fork cartridge apart, there's right down here, there's like a spring with a check ball in there. And then there's this shim stack up here that we're going to replace. So then you can see, once you get that loosened up, this comes off. We'll also be replacing this crush washer right here. That seals the cartridge from the outside. And then get that off. There's a spring and then a little check ball. And that check ball seals on a little seat in there, if you can see that. I don't know. And then we can grab our shims off of here. There's 3 of them, and they just go on similar to like piston rings on an engine. So we take all 3 of these off, and on this side, this just unthreads. You can put a wrench here or an impact on here and just snap it real quick, and it'll just pop right off real easy. So that comes out. There's this little spring seat there, and then this is pressed on. We won't worry about it, and this goes straight through. So this is just one piece. We'll get this all cleaned up and back together. So we have everything all cleaned up and ready to go back together. So if you just follow along, we put our spring down, and then we put our little retaining seat there, and then we're going to screw this piece on. We do not need any Loctite or anything on that piece. And then we have our ball. We're going to put our ball in first, and then we are going to put our spring down, And then our spring just goes right into that hole. So it kind of gets pushed in like that. And this can be tightened up. And then this clear bushing goes over that and sits like there. And then we can put down all of our little shims. So you just want to do these one by one, and there's no up or down, but you're going to want to kind of stagger them, kind of like you would piston rings, so that all the gaps are not in the, like all over each other. So they're kind of all offset. And then we have our internal stuff right here, and we're going to want to slide this on the fork tube. And then just push your damper rod all the way down, grab the little aluminum piece, and we can just use that snap ring pliers that we used to take it out to put it in. And putting it in, you just want to get it, I guess just as tight as you can. And then with that same snap ring pliers you just used to tighten up that fork, you can install the snap ring. Oops. Just like that. And then with our fork leg here, we can slide our fork tube down in there. Cartridge is going to come out the bottom. And we'll just slide it all the way through. And then we will put a new crush washer right there on the top of our cartridge. A new bushing inside the lower nut down here. Make sure that's seated, and there's a rounded edge. The rounded edge goes facing the bottom, and there's a nice positive snap when that goes in there. So that goes on like that. We'll bring this up, get this. Oops. See, I almost made a mistake there. We got a new copper crush ring for here. Put that on there. Make sure that crush washer is still on there. There we go. And get that tightened up like that. And that was, I think it was a 30 millimeter for that. Put a new nut and washer. And then we'll put a new little rubber cap on the end of our fork leg. Just like that. Looking nice, looking nice. And then our brand new springs can get dropped down into there. And then our fork seal, slide that over like that. Be cautious not to damage the seal, so you just kind of want to take your time. And then we can slide our fork seal onto the fork tube, and then we'll drive it into the fork body with a fork seal driver. And then we can put new fork gaiters on our forks. And on these fork gaiters have a little hole on it. That's for like venting as the air. So the air inside the fork gaiter here has somewhere to go. And that's going to align with a little dowel. We can slide our fork tube up the triple tree. You got to be careful of the wires here for the turn signals, because those are routed internal to these little headlight ears, they're called. And we just want to get this all the way up. And then when we hit the top, we're going to install that large nut. And then we can just tighten up this top nut here. And then we're going to fill each fork leg with 280 cc's of oil. Now, BMW recommends 280 cc's of oil for after a rebuild, or 250 if you're just servicing your oil. Now, everyone can argue all they want about what weight fork oil to use, but I use 15 weight, and I've had great luck with it. And then with this little green washer on our fork cap, that goes there, and then we can thread it right into that top nut on our fork and just snug it up with the pliers that we've been using. And then we can get our front fender mounted. So when we do our front fender, we're just going to put it loosely on here, set this down in the studs, obviously, because we can't get the front fender on or it'll be very hard to get the fender on with a wheel here, and we have to worry about our axle alignment yet. So we're just going to set the fender on there and then just get these bolts just like started by hand. So one of the most important things is aligning your axle. So since we had both these fork tubes off, these fork legs are twisted. They're not perfectly, this bore is not perfectly in alignment. So in order to do so, we just basically install our axle with our, just loosely without a wheel or anything, and then we'll get this threaded in, this pinch bolt set, and then with our axle still in there, I'm just going to get this fork brace / fender mount tightened up on here. And then our axle can come out of here and our wheel can go in. We will then reinstall our front brake brace right here, just a nut on the stud, and then a through bolt with a nut right here, 2 washers on each side. We're replacing everything with stainless steel along the way. And then we'll get our axle snugged up with a 22 millimeter socket and our front pinch bolt for our axle. We can then reinstall our front brake cable and reinstall hose clamps on our fork gators here. So that will pretty much conclude the front end rebuild for an R75/5. This is going to transfer over to so many other Airhead models. But let's get it off the lift. I'll get this brake adjusted and these fork gators done. We'll get it off the lift, and then let's see how the suspension feels. Way better. So now you can see when you hit the brake, it dives a little, which is kind of natural of an Airhead, but it's way more like planted. I don't know, like it has dampening. So like when I push down, I can't just like dribble it, you know, or it actually has like rebound, you know. Granted, we have a little bit stiffer springs. Feels way better. I can't even describe how much better that feels. I can't wait to ride this and be able to actually tell the difference.